Farmers are getting crazy prices, really, really high prices. And those prices are what is driving the planting, the new planting, the opening up of new farms, the better post-harvest handling. People are now taking care of coffee because they can see it's money. And we believe that self-interest will drive production and increasing production through.
So let us see how to move that offer practically, So looking at alternative markets is okay, but we need that traceability. We need to ensure that we are producing up to standard. So what EU is telling us is good for us to be able to reach out to all these different.
Uganda says meeting these standards is part of a bigger plan, not just to export more coffee, but to process more of it locally, positioning the country as a value addition hub for Africa's coffee industry.
For more than half a century, the global coffee economy has operated under an arrangement that favored a small group of consuming nations while marginalizing the countries that actually grow the crop. Uganda, despite being one of the world's most reliable and high-volume coffee producers, existed largely as a supplier of raw beans to foreign markets where the real profits were captured. That structure is now unraveling, and the consequences are reaching far beyond East Africa, shaking the foundations of American dominance in global coffee trade. Uganda is not a minor player in the coffee world. The country is Africa's largest coffee exporter and consistently ranks among the top 10 producers globally. Coffee accounts for a major share of Uganda's export earnings and supports the livelihoods of millions of farmers across the country. Entire regions depend on the crop for income, employment, and local economic stability. Yet for decades, Uganda's role in the global coffee chain was deliberately limited. The country grew the beans, harvested them, dried them, and shipped them out. Everything else, pricing, branding, roasting, retail, was controlled elsewhere. The United States emerged over time as one of the most influential actors in this system. American commodity traders, multinational beverage companies, and financial institutions played a decisive role in shaping how Ugandan coffee moved through the global market. Through futures exchanges, international shipping contracts, quality certification regimes, and marketing power, U.S. companies exercised influence that extended far beyond simple purchasing. They helped set prices, determine acceptable quality standards, and dictated contract terms that left producing countries with little leverage. For years, Uganda accepted this arrangement as unavoidable. Access to Western markets was framed as a privilege rather than a mutual exchange. The country's coffee beans entered the United States, were blended, branded, and sold at prices many times higher than what farmers received. Meanwhile, Ugandan growers remained exposed to volatile global prices, climate shocks, and rising production costs. Even as global coffee consumption surged, the benefits at the source remained limited. That imbalance slowly became politically and economically untenable. Ugandan policymakers began questioning why one of the world's most important coffee producers remained stuck exporting raw materials while foreign firms captured the value. This question gained urgency as global commodity markets shifted, geopolitical alliances evolved, and African countries increasingly sought to reclaim control over their resources. The response was not sudden, but it was deliberate. Uganda began a multi-year effort to restructure its coffee sector from the ground up. New policies emphasized domestic processing, farmer cooperatives, price stabilization mechanisms, and diversification of export destinations. Instead of relying almost exclusively on traditional Western buyers, Uganda actively pursued new markets in Asia, the Middle East, and within Africa itself. Central to this transformation was the decision to reduce dependence on raw bean exports. Uganda invested in modern processing facilities capable of roasting, grinding, and packaging coffee domestically. These facilities were supported by a mix of public funding, private investment, and cooperative ownership models. The objective was clear: move Uganda up the value chain and ensure that more of the final product's price stayed within the country. This shift directly affected U.S. interests. American coffee companies have long relied on consistent access to Ugandan Robusta beans, which are widely used in instant coffee, blends, and mass-market products. Uganda's reliability as a supplier made it a cornerstone of U.S. import strategies. But as Uganda redirected volumes toward value-added exports and alternative partners, the availability of beans under old pricing structures began to tighten. At the same time, Uganda introduced regulatory reforms that changed how foreign companies could operate in its coffee sector. Export licenses were reviewed more strictly. Companies were encouraged or required to participate in local value addition initiatives. Contracts increasingly favored long-term stability over speculative pricing. These measures reduced the ability of foreign traders to extract profits without contributing to local development. The impact on American firms was immediate. Some U.S. buyers found themselves facing higher prices, reduced volumes, or stricter conditions. Others were effectively sidelined as Uganda prioritized partners willing to invest in processing infrastructure, technology transfer, and farmer support programs. The old model, in which Western companies could dictate terms simply by controlling access to markets, no longer functioned. This transformation coincided with rising demand for coffee in non-Western markets. Consumption in Asia has grown steadily, particularly in China, India, and Southeast Asia. Middle Eastern markets have also expanded, driven by population growth and changing consumer habits. These regions offered Uganda new opportunities to sell coffee under different terms, often involving direct government-to-government agreements that bypass traditional commodity brokers. Unlike conventional Western contracts, many of these new deals emphasized long-term partnerships rather than short-term price advantages. They included commitments to infrastructure development, logistics support, and sometimes financing for agricultural modernization. For Uganda, this approach offered greater predictability and reduced exposure to the price volatility that has long plagued coffee producers. From Washington's perspective, the implications were troubling. Coffee may not carry the strategic weight of oil or rare earth minerals, but it represents a broader pattern. Uganda's actions are part of a continental shift in which African nations are renegotiating their roles in global trade. The loss of influence in coffee signals a wider erosion of U.S. leverage over commodity supply chains that were once taken for granted. American agricultural groups and trade analysts have warned that these changes could have lasting consequences. Reduced access to Ugandan beans could increase costs for U.S. processors and consumers. It could also weaken the position of American companies in global coffee markets, especially as competitors secure preferential access through new partnerships. Uganda, however, has shown little inclination to reverse course. Officials argue that the country's responsibility is first to its farmers and citizens, not to preserving foreign profit margins. By capturing more value domestically, Uganda aims to increase rural incomes, stabilize export revenues, and reduce vulnerability to external shocks. This strategy has already begun to show results. Farm gate prices have improved in several regions. Cooperative participation has increased, giving farmers greater bargaining power. Processing and logistics jobs have expanded, creating new employment opportunities beyond farming itself. These gains reinforce political support for the new model and make a return to the old system unlikely. The United States has not responded with overt retaliation, but the tension is evident. Diplomatic discussions increasingly include trade concerns, and U.S. policymakers are watching closely as African countries assert greater control over their resources. The fear is not simply losing access to coffee, but losing influence in shaping global economic rules. Uganda's move also carries symbolic significance. For decades, African countries were told that development required integration into Western-led markets on Western terms. Uganda's experience suggests a different path, one in which producers define the terms of engagement and choose partners strategically. The coffee sector, long emblematic of unequal global trade, has become a testing ground for this new approach. By restructuring how coffee is produced, processed, and sold, Uganda is challenging assumptions about who holds power in global markets. For American companies, adaptation is now unavoidable. Those willing to invest locally, accept new pricing structures, and operate as partners rather than extractors may still find opportunities. Those clinging to the old model face declining influence and shrinking access. The transformation underway in Uganda is not isolated. Similar dynamics are unfolding across Africa, from cocoa in West Africa to minerals in the South. Together, these shifts point toward a more multipolar global economy in which resource-producing nations exercise greater agency. In this context, Uganda's coffee strategy represents more than a trade adjustment. It marks a reassertion of sovereignty in an industry that has long symbolized imbalance. The decline of U.S. dominance in this space is not the result of hostility, but of structural change driven by producer countries seeking fairer outcomes. The global coffee market is entering a new phase, one defined by competition, diversification, and renegotiated power relations. Uganda's role in shaping this future underscores a broader reality. Control over resources is increasingly shifting back to those who produce them. For the United States, the challenge is not simply to regain lost ground, but to adapt to a world in which economic influence must be earned through partnership rather than assumed through legacy power. The era of unquestioned dominance in African commodity markets is fading, replaced by a more complex and contested landscape. Uganda's coffee industry stands at the forefront of this transformation. What began as a national development strategy has become a signal to the world that the rules of global trade are changing. And for American interests long accustomed to setting those rules, the message is unmistakable.
You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.